This is the Chris Berry Show. Expert information on wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to the Chris Berry Show. This is Chris Berry, and today what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a positive focus, which we do every show, but then in our second segment, we're going to get into some things to think about if you're planning on retiring in 2019. So if you're retiring in 2019, congratulations. And what I'm going to do is outline some things to think about. And even if you're not retiring, it's still going to be good information, a good review. So that's going to be our second segment. And then our third segment, we're going to get into our questions and answers. So our listeners have submitted questions either via email or phone. We're going to get into those questions and answers. But first, we're going to start off with a positive focus. And with Christmas coming and going and the New Year's coming up, obviously it's going to be based around the holidays. And so my positive focus this week, obviously, is going to be Christmas. And specifically just seeing my children's interactions or reactions towards the holidays, towards Santa Claus, towards Christmas. So my son Ryan, he's age 8. Very, very skeptical child. And then my daughter Madison, she is 6. So it's a great time to see the holidays through their eyes. But my son, he's kind of like an engineering type, always trying to figure out how things work or really trying to get to the root cause of things. Really wants to understand things. And I love his always trying to kind of gain knowledge. And sometimes it manifests in odd ways. So the funny thing was that we every year we put out some treats for Santa Claus, obviously. We don't want the big man to go hungry. So we put out a candy bar as well as some cookies for the reindeer. Or some carrots for the reindeer. So we want to make sure that Santa Claus is well fed. Well, my son, he's a little bit skeptical about the Santa Claus thing, and he knows that some of the Santa Clauses that we see aren't the real Santa Claus. So he wants to verify Santa Claus. So he grabbed this whiteboard. So my kids, they play with this whiteboard. They kind of doodle on it and draw pictures, and we do games on this big whiteboard. It's like a wall-size whiteboard, but it's on the ground, and they can just play with it. So my son Ryan, he decided to put Santa Claus through the paces here. So he wrote out this form that was asking some personal information. We wanted to make sure Santa Claus didn't have any identity theft, I think. So at the top of the form, he wrote out, "I will not believe in you unless you fill this out." And then below that, his first request was to draw what you look like. So apparently he wants to see Santa Claus's identification. On this form, he requested Santa Claus to sign his name. And then I thought it was interesting. He requested that Santa Claus fill out any allergies or any allergic concerns he may have. So maybe Santa Claus is allergic to penicillin or something like that. And then Santa Claus's age, of course, just like anything else. You need to know the age on a license. Then he did put a spot for notes. So if Santa Claus had any specific notes that he wanted. And then he wanted Santa Claus's phone number, of course. And I'm not sure if Santa Claus would be willing to give out his phone number. I'm sure he'd get plenty of calls. And then at the bottom, of course, the reindeer name. So it was quite the test for Santa Claus. Unfortunately, Santa Claus didn't fill out that form. He ended up just erasing the form, drawing a Christmas tree, and then initialing a SC for Santa Claus. But I just thought it was pretty funny that my son basically was creating a online banking verification form that's I think it's more difficult for Santa Claus to fill out that form than some of the voter registration stuff going on right now. So it was just cute seeing that. And then, of course, when Christmas came, it was great to see their reactions to their toys and the books and the games that they receive. So that was my positive focus. So it was great to see that, to see Christmas through the eyes of the children. So that was cool. Now, along with Christmas, so Christmas was great, but for many people, unfortunately, maybe not a positive focus was how the market was doing on Christmas Eve. So I was just taking a look, and apparently the Christmas Eve, the Dow dropped the most ever on Christmas Eve, which is difficult as you're spending all this money on shopping and getting presents to have the Dow do what it did, which brings up the concept of market volatility. And what should you be doing or thinking about based on how the market is doing? And I saw this interesting article breaking up how you should treat the market volatility based on your age. And I thought I'd share some of that in this first segment of the Chris Berry Show, because obviously this is something that's affecting a lot of people right now, is just this market volatility. So it was interesting. It broke it up based on age. And so if you're a young investor, say age 20 to 30, these types of things, the market dips, really shouldn't worry you too much, regardless of how you've invested your money. Because you're going to have most likely time to make it up. Now, one of the things that I advocate is what's called a bucket plan, and a bucket plan process of organizing your money into different buckets. And this is true regardless of your age. For example, if you're in your 20s and 30s and planned on taking out some money to pay for your kids' college education, and the market just took this huge drop, well, that's going to have a negative impact on what you're able to take out potentially. But typically, most 20 and 30-year-olds, they're focused entirely on accumulation. And so with this downturn in the market, now might be even a good time to invest more money into the market if you believe that the market's going to bounce up. So if you're in 2030s, probably not something you're super concerned with, but it is an opportunity maybe to put some more money into the market if you had some savings available. Now, for our 40 to 50-year-olds, these are kind of the middle-aged, not quite retired, but having an eye on retirement in the future. One of the biggest mistakes we see people make in this situation is taking the money out of the market. So acting emotionally. Just because there's a bear market, if the market's going to go down, then it has to go up. Now, there are some opportunities here depending on kind of where you're at in terms of how you have your assets allocated, whether they're in tax-deferred or tax-free or taxable buckets. But the big thing here, the biggest mistake is to just not act emotionally, but make sure to have a plan in place. Make sure that you have cash reserves so that you don't have to dig into some of those investments unless you're planning on it. Then if you're 60s and 70s, kind of getting near retirement, hopefully you've set yourself up in a way that the market didn't have a huge effect on you. Because really the only time that you're going to lose money is when you take the money out. So this is where things like the bucket plan really hit home. Understanding that the market's going to go up and down, but having a time horizon or understanding a time horizon of when you're going to utilize this money. So this is where we advocate, and it becomes vitally important, is this bucket plan approach. And we have a free book that we're going to offer to our first 3 callers to the Chris Berry Show that's called The Bucket Plan. And it's a book written by a colleague of mine, Jason Smith, but I wrote the foreword, a special foreword along with Ed Slott, if you've ever heard of Ed Slott. And what this bucket plan book does is it outlines an approach for managing volatility, whether you're in your 20s and 30s or if you're in retirement. And what it does is we allocate kind of your money into different buckets based on a time horizon. And the first bucket, and it's 3 different buckets, so the first bucket would be a now bucket of money. So think of this as the money that you're going to need over the next year. So this is money that maybe if you are in retirement is your income, as well as any planned expenses. So if you're planning on a cruise or something like that, that should be in your now bucket. And this money should be safe, liquid, available, not affected by the market. And then also in that now bucket would be your income needs for the year if you are in retirement. If not, no big deal. Planned expenses, and then also your emergency fund. So everyone has that kind of amount of money that they need to feel safe and liquid so that if there is something that comes up, they can sleep peacefully, having that peace of mind. So that's the now bucket. And that should be unaffected by the market fluctuations because it should be safe and liquid. Think of it as in your checking, savings, that type of thing. And then your second bucket of money is what we call your soon bucket of money. So this is the money that you're going to need over maybe the next 5 to 10 years. And hopefully this money is invested safely and conservatively so that if the market fluctuation that just happened, you're not sweating bullets because this ideally this money isn't going to be money that you're going to need right away. And so where we see that volatility would be in that later bucket of money that you're not going to want to draw on right away, money that is going to fluctuate, that is a little bit more volatile than that soon bucket of money. So the idea is that you have some money that's safe, liquid, available now, and then in your soon bucket of money, and this is really what buys you a time horizon to that later bucket, this is money that's maybe invested more conservatively than that later bucket of money. And that looks different for everyone. But I've allowed clients in positions where they didn't lose any money in this market volatility. In their soon bucket of money. The later bucket of money, again, that's money that's geared towards later in life, maybe next 5 or over 10 years out. So really what it's doing is almost taking that approach of, well, how old are you? And maybe looking at doing different things based on your age. Well, what we're doing with the bucket plan is basically doing the same thing, but putting an age on your money. So again, if you're in your 20s and 30s, think of that as later bucket of money. Like you have time for the market to make it up, and maybe you invest a little more in the market. And then if you're getting near retirement or in retirement, hopefully things are set up in a way that if the market, when the market did go down, you didn't lose too much or more than you're willing to lose. And then obviously if you are in retirement, and hopefully you should be in a position where you are safer with your money. And again, market volatility looks different for everyone. So one person that's age 65 may be willing to take on more risk than someone else who is age 65. So one of the things that we have for you is a free tool to test your market volatility. How much risk are you willing to take on? And this is an online tool that it only takes you about 5 minutes. And you can go to this tool, utilize it to figure out what is your risk score. So how much risk are you really, truly willing to take on? So if you go to the website Risk Score Now, RISK, SCORE, riskscorenow.com, what you can do is you can answer a couple simple questions to figure out what your risk score is, to figure out just how much volatility you're willing to take on. Because understand, as you, if you're looking for bigger returns, we have this thing called the risk pyramid. The more return you're chasing, understand the more risk you're willing to take on. And the market's going to do what the market's going to do. So have 2 free resources for you this week. One, you can just go online, go to riskscorenow.com, and I'll link that in our website. So if you go to thechrisberryshow.com, I'll have that link to calculate what your risk score is. But you can go to www.riskscorenow to calculate what your risk number is, to figure out how much volatility you're willing to take on, which is especially important when there's market fluctuations like this. And then if you want a free copy of the Bucket Plan book, give us a call at 810-355-2584, or you can shoot us an email at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. Or you can go to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, if you want to request a free copy of that book. So some free resources available to those who are suffering from this market volatility that's happening. And I don't want to end on a negative note like that in our first segment. So I thought what I would do is share a fun article I stumbled upon this week. And thanks to Lori for pointing this one out. So it's all about the dollar bill. So we're talking a lot about money today, so I thought I'd just talk about the dollar bill. And so there's some interesting things that I read about the dollar bill. So first, what are dollar bills made of? Bills are made from a blend of linen and cotton, which is why they don't fall apart in the wash the way paper does. And I know if you feel a dollar bill, you kind of get that idea. Here's another one. On the face of a dollar, what does the letter inside of the circular seal mean? So there's a circle, a seal, and you're going to see different letters in there. And it's going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. And basically what that corresponds to is where the bill was created. So it signifies the Federal Reserve Bank that placed the order for the bill. Next, can you find any tiny owls or spiders hidden on the front of the bill? So if you look closely at the bill, there's a lot of like hidden kind of signals and symbols inside of there. So you can, if you look, some people, if you look at the top left near the large one, they're going to see a tiny owl resting on the top left corner. So these are kind of fun little things. Of course, you see the Great Seal of the United States. The greenback of the dollar bill features the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States. The Founding Fathers approved this design in 1782. So that's kind of cool. Next one, what does annuit coptis mean? And what that is the first of the three Latin phases on the back of the bill. And it's translated as God has favored our undertakings. And many of the founders, Franklin and George Washington among them, believe that God's will was behind successful creation of the United States. So just thought I'd share a couple interesting little tidbits about the dollar bill. Thought I'd share that as something that we can end this first segment. It's a little happier than talking about the market volatility. So join me in next segment as we get into some key things to think about in 2019, especially if you're planning on retiring.
The cost of care for an elderly loved one or a loved one with a chronic illness is shockingly expensive. If you are dealing with the unbelievable cost of care, make sure you get all the benefits you're entitled to. Here's certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton.
Most of my clients are really concerned about long-term care costs. They don't know where to turn, and what we can do is put together legal strategies to protect your resources and also bring in additional resources to help pay that cost of care. One of the things that they often say is that I wish I knew about this years prior. And unfortunately, the information's out there, but there's just so few certified elder law attorneys. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, it's my job to make sure that our seniors, our loved ones, our veterans have the best quality of care possible and the best quality of life possible.
Protect your hard-earned assets from probate, long-term care costs, and the IRS. The Elder Care Firm will get you the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid. Visit theeldercarefirm.com and schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. That's theeldercarefirm.com.
And welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. So in our first segment, we talked about the market volatility, and we offered two free resources for you. One, we can send you a full copy of our bucket plan book that talks about protecting and growing your assets for a worry-free retirement. And that's one of the ways that you can fight back against that market volatility. Just give us a call at 810-355-2584, and the first three people who request a copy, we'll put that in the mail, 810-355-2584. And then the second free resource is available to everyone. All you have to do is go to riskscorenow.com, answer a couple questions, takes you about 5 minutes, and then what it'll do is help you calculate your risk score. So how much risk are you willing to take on during retirement? And if you, again, go to www.riskscorenow.com, you can get access to that risk number. And so in this segment, what I'd like to do is just cover some of the things to think about if you're one of those lucky people who are retiring in 2019. Now, if you're not planning on retiring in 2019, stick with us because I think this will be important information no matter where you are in terms of working or retirement. So the first thing is that if you are planning on retiring, or even if you're not, the first thing you should do is understand what your expenses are. So have a general idea of what you spend. You don't have to have it down to a specific budget per se, but at least have an idea of what your expenses are, because from there you can calculate what's called the income gap, which is something we talk about in the Bucket Plan book. But what the income gap is basically your expenses that you're going to have on a monthly basis, looking at that compared to your fixed sources of income. So things like a Social Security and pension. And if there's a gap between your expenses and your Social Security and pension, then we need to find a way to fill that gap. And that might be through assets or other means. But we need to understand what your expenses are. That's generally a good starting point. Now, one of those expenses, and one of the most overlooked expenses that can really sneak up on people if they don't plan right, or if they're looking at an early retirement, is healthcare. So how are you going to fund healthcare? Because once you reach 65, you're eligible for Medicare. Or if you're over age 65, you're eligible for Medicare. But what if you're like a lot of the people that I talk to or our clients who look at retiring at maybe 59 or 62? How are you going to bridge that gap until you reach 65? And there's different things you can think about, one of those being COBRA or some of the plans that are available through the Affordable Care Act. But just something to keep in mind is that you need to be able to close that gap between when you retire and Medicare if you do retire earlier than 65. So the first thing, understand your expenses, and one of those expenses being healthcare costs. Next, know your Social Security strategy. So this is one of the most important things because once you fire that Social Security bullet, once you make that decision, it's really hard to undo that. There are some exceptions, but really you can't go back. You can't unwind what you've done. So you need to understand what your Social Security strategy will be. And this is one of the things that we can help our clients with is we do what we call a Social Security optimization. And sometimes when we've run these reports for our clients, we found that the swing between maybe taking Social Security as early as possible versus a different strategy could be the difference between $100,000 in someone's retirement. And it's all by how you take Social Security and the timing of your decisions with regards to Social Security. So something to think about is the timing of Social Security. As a general rule, the longer you think you're going to live, the more it makes sense to delay taking Social Security. And then if you're a married couple, there's some interesting strategies that are available to really maximize Social Security, especially depending on when you were born. The earlier you're born, the more options you're going to have on your table. But just keep that in mind. How are you going to take Social Security? Because I would not recommend just automatically taking Social Security as early as possible because you might be leaving a lot of money on the table. And this is something that you paid into, so you probably want to maximize what you get out of it. And so that's where some of these Social Security timing strategies can really make the difference. Like I said, could be a $100,000 swing in someone's retirement just based on how and when you take Social Security. And then next, evaluate income and tax strategies. So one of the things that we say is you can't really control the market. And we certainly saw that on Christmas Eve as the market tumbled. But what you can do to a certain extent is control your tax planning. Now, you can't control taxes, okay? We can't, other than through voting, we can't lower income tax. But what we can do is we can control when we pay the tax and potentially how much tax we pay. Because there's different income tax strategies that are available. So specifically what I'm talking about is that tax-deferred money, the money you have inside of your tax-deferred accounts, things like your IRAs and 401ks. This is money that has not been taxed. And when you take the money out, then you're going to have to pay the piper, so to speak. And so there's this magic time from 59 and a half to 70 and a half when you can take this money out without any rules rules other than just understanding that you have to pay the tax. Because if you try to take the money out prior to 59 and a half, unless you have a certain exception or can rely on a certain tax code like a Rule 72T specifically, then you're going to have to pay a penalty, a 10% penalty on that money. And then if you forget or choose not to take out your required minimum distributions that are required at age 70 and a half, then you're going to pay a penalty of up to 50%. So between 59 and a half and 70 and a half, you have some freedom on how you pay tax. And so a lot of people think that taxes are going to go up in the future. In fact, that's the way the law currently is structured, is that in 2025, our current tax law sunsets and we revert back to the previous tax code. So given that, then the strategy is to think about how much tax you're willing to pay now so that you pay the tax now so you don't have to pay more potentially later, especially if you are one of those people that look at retiring and then think about not taking your Social Security right away, because you can allow your Social Security to grow, and your Social Security grows at 8% a year up to age 70 roughly. And so what you can do is you can minimize that retirement savings tax time bomb that can hit you at 70 and a half if you haven't planned properly. Because what happens at 70 and a half is you have to start taking out your required minimum distributions. And at 70 and a half, that's 3.65%, and it goes up every year thereafter. And so when you take out these RMDs, the required minimum distributions, you have to pay income tax on them. Now, you add on top of the RMDs, maybe you also have a pension. Well, guess what? That's taxed as well. So now you have your RMDs coming out, you have your pension coming out, and guess what? If you have both of those coming out, chances are that's going to make sure that your Social Security now will get taxed as well. Because 85% of your Social Security can be taxed depending upon the amount of income you have. So all these strategies kind of fit together. So you need to take into account, when are you going to time Social Security? When are you going to take Social Security? And then with that, you're going to have to look at tax planning. So the day and age of just deferring paying taxes as long as possible probably doesn't make sense. You need to analyze whether it makes sense to pay the tax now or maybe you do want to defer. And so if you do pay the tax now, then what do you do with that money? You can still invest it. You can move it into a Roth, or you can move it into an asset protection trust. But you've gotten that money out of that partnership with the U.S. government, so that if income taxes go up, which they are slated to, if we finally get around to trying to pay down some of this $21 trillion debt that we have, then you've already gotten that money off of the retirement savings tax time bomb. Think of it as a train that's coming down the tracks. You've gotten that money off the tracks. So something to think about is that income tax and Social Security strategy. Now, the next thing, and this is very important based on just this past week, is check on the risk in your retirement accounts. So if you have 401k or IRA, make sure your investment mix makes sense for your retirement income plan. And this really depends on everyone, and that's why we have this free resource at www.riskscorenow.com, where we can help you calculate what is your risk number. How much volatility are you willing to take on? Because while you've done a great job of accumulating all this wealth, now we need to figure out, how are we going to look at distributing the wealth? How are we going to start drawing down this money? And one of the big things we have to protect ourselves from is what's called sequence of return risk, where depending on how the market's doing, when we make these withdrawals can have a devastating effect on our retirement nest egg. So one of the things that we have is a way to answer a couple questions, and then we can help you calculate your risk score so that you have something quantitative to analyze your portfolio against. And if you want more information or want to take that risk assessment, go to www.riskscorenow.com and you'll get your risk score. So the point here being is now's the time, especially if you're planning on retiring in 2019, check the risk in your retirement accounts. And then the next thing is have a cushion. So make sure to have that emergency fund. Calculate how much money should be in your now bucket. So this is money that should be out of the market, invested in checking, savings, money markets, things that you're not going to lose any money on, and should be pretty safe and liquid and conservative. So this would be things like your income needs for the next year. So if you are in retirement, make sure that you have that money, basically your paychecks that you would have had while you're working, that's safe and liquid and available. Next, make sure that you have any covered expenses. So if you're planning on taking a big trip, I had some clients I was working with last week. In January, they're planning on taking a trip to Hawaii. So make sure that they have that taken care of. And then whatever that emergency fund is. So that money, that mattress money, that if something happens, you feel safe knowing that you have it covered. So that all should be basically your now bucket of money. So have a cushion. All your money shouldn't be in your market, most likely. You should have some type of cushion so that if the market's down, you're not going to have to sell investments at a lower price to generate income that you need to live on. Now, you might want to sell those investments at a lower price for a variety of other reasons, but it shouldn't be just to generate the annual income that you're going to need to live on. The next thing is going to be to review your estate plan. So it's probably been, if you're planning on retiring in 2019, it's probably been a couple of years, maybe 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years since you dusted off that estate plan to take a look at it. A lot of times when I'm sitting down with clients who are retiring or planning on retiring soon or just recently retired, they haven't had their estate plan reviewed in over 10 years, when maybe the kids used to be minors, now they're adults and they're married and you have grandkids. So those are all reasons why you need to take another look at that estate plan. And a lot of times it makes sense to take a look at the estate plan because things have changed. Some of the things we're concerned with 5, 10, 15 years ago, we're not concerned with anymore, and there's other things that we're concerned with. For example, now with a lot of the trust that we're utilizing, we're building in asset protection for the beneficiaries for their lifetimes, making sure that the money stays in the bloodline versus going out right to the kids at 25, 30, or 35. Or we're talking about setting up asset protection trust to protect against long-term care costs and lawsuits. So you've done a great job of accumulating all this wealth. Now it's time to protect it. And with proper estate planning, proper trust-based planning, we can protect this wealth that you've worked so hard to build. So it's a good time if you are planning on retiring in 2019, or if you haven't taken a look at that estate plan in a couple of years, maybe you should dust it off. And so one of the things we have actually, we have a couple of workshops coming up where we do talk about estate planning. So if you are interested in that, then we have these workshops about once a week at one of our different locations, whether it's Brighton, Ann Arbor, Livonia, Novi, Lansing, or Bloomfield Hills. So if you do want more information on those workshops, just go to our website, thechrisberryshow.com. They are free to register, but space is limited, so you need to make sure that you RSVP for one of those workshops. But that's a good starting point. If you haven't taken a look at your estate plan in a number of years, I invite you to attend one of our free workshops. A lot of times people find it's very valuable, and they want to share that information with people they care about, their friends and family. So that's another thing to think about if you're retiring in 2019. Review that estate plan. And then the last thing is just to prepare emotionally for retirement. This is a big transition. You've spent a lot of time being a working person. Your identity has been tied up in your job maybe, or in your profession. For example, my dad was a professor for over 45 years. There's a lot that goes into just having that as part of who you are. But understand now that you have to maybe reinvent yourself in a certain way. And one of the things that I find is important for people is that they don't just retire from something. They don't just, I'm done. But they retire to something. They have something that they're looking forward to. And I think that's really one of the keys to enjoyments of a happy life is always have something to look forward to. Always have something that excites you to get up and get moving and get out of bed each day. And it's different for everyone. Some people, I have a client who she just loves her volunteering. She spends a lot of time going down to Haiti, and you just see her eyes light up when you talk to her about it. For other people, it's family or gardening or traveling. But figure out what that thing is that you're excited to do in retirement. So hopefully that was helpful. Some things to think about in 2019 if you're planning on retiring. I think it's important information even if you're not planning on retiring in 2019 and maybe you're already retired or maybe retirement is down the road. But just some things to think about, good things to think about on an annual basis. So with that, join me as we get into some of our questions and answers from our listeners. So join me in the next segment.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Sherry Skelton and her family did from Fenton.
My mother has Alzheimer's. My mom just had a regular will. She didn't have anything set up in a trust. And Chris set up a brand new will, and he got everything rolling. Chris has been extremely helpful. My mom would never have gotten my dad's VA benefits if it wasn't for them. Lori, who actually did a lot of the paperwork for the VA, she was like my new best friend. I talked to her probably 2-3 times a week, and we would be on hold together while we were waiting for the VA to pick up. We were approved, and we never would have been able to do that if it wasn't for them. I can't even begin to tell you what he did for my family.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show. So in this segment, we like to get into our questions and answers. But before I did that, I just want to, again, kind of review some of the free resources we have available specifically for the Chris Berry Show listeners. And the first one is a free copy to the first 3 callers who call in to the show. We'll mail out for free. We'll cover shipping and handling for you even. A copy of The Bucket Plan, which is a book written by a colleague of mine along with Ed Slott, and I wrote the foreword that talks about protecting and growing your assets for a worry-free retirement. So that's available to the first 3 callers. And call in at 810-355-2584. And then the second free resource is available to everyone. All you have to do is go online to www.riskscorenow.com, put in, answer a couple questions, and what you'll get is a risk score. And with that risk score, you'll better be able to handle or figure out whether your current portfolio matches the volatility you're willing to take on. Now, when you do call in for a free copy of the Bucket Plan book, make sure to give us your full name and address. Obviously, we need to know where we're shipping this book out to. So make sure to give us a full name and address. Or if you want to email that to us, just email us at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com, and we'll get that out to the first 3 people who respond. And so now what I want to do is get into the question and answer portion of the show, where we have listeners who have submitted questions either via the phone at 810-355-2584. And if you do have a question, feel free to call in, or via email at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. And so the first question is from Jake. And Jake asks, is a joint bank account a probate asset? Myself and my dad had a joint bank account. He passed earlier this year and was divorced. After his death, I used a death certificate to remove his name from the account. Is the joint account now a probate asset or not? Well, Jake, it sounds like lucky for you that it is not a probate asset. So most people want to try to avoid probate because it's a court cost. It's because of the court cost. It's time consuming. 3 to 5% of any assets that typically get eaten up, 3 to 5% of any assets going through probate typically get eaten up in cost. So it's one of the big reasons why people want to avoid probate. Also, it's time consuming. By statute in Michigan, it takes at least 5 months for assets to go through the probate process. So most people want to avoid probate. But lucky for you, Jake, it sounds like that account will avoid probate because there are 3 ways that assets can avoid probate. First would be joint ownership. Second would be having a beneficiary designation on it. And third would be through a trust. So as long as it passes through one of those first 3 ways and doesn't end up going into probate court, then you should be good to go. And it sounds like it passed through joint ownership. So when your dad passed away, the accounts became yours through joint ownership, thereby avoiding probate. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you want to know more about avoiding probate, feel free to come to one of our free clarity building workshops where we talk about protecting your stuff both legally, financially, and from a tax perspective in 3 easy steps. And we have workshops coming up in January, coming up in our Brighton and Ann Arbor offices. So in Brighton, we have Thursday night, January 17th at our Brighton location at 6 p.m., Wednesday, January 23rd at 10 a.m., or Tuesday, January 29th at 2 p.m. And then we're in Ann Arbor in January as well. Thursday, January 10th at 10 a.m., Thursday, January 24th at 6 p.m., and then Wednesday, January 30th at 2 p.m. Those were our Ann Arbor offices. I know we had a couple people asking for Livonia. I think that's going to be coming up in the next month. I think in February we might be getting back to the Livonia area. So if you do want to attend one of those free clarity building workshops or want more information on those, give us a call at 810-355-2584 or shoot us an email at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. And that's one of the first things we talk about in the workshop is building your own set of rules. So what can we do to avoid having the government create a rule book for us, but instead creating our own rule book? And that's what avoiding probate is all about, not relying on the government's rule book, creating your own rule book. So hopefully that was helpful, Jake. Now our next question, does my father qualify for Medicaid if all assets, such as a home, mutual fund, CDs, inside of an IRA are owned by my mother? And this is asked by Deborah. Total asset value is $700,000. He's currently in a nursing home. So Deborah, it sounds like your dad's not going to qualify for Medicaid right now because Medicaid, which is a governmental program, has an asset test tied to it, where a married couple can only protect, or a married couple, what they're going to make you do is cut your assets in half, and at most, the healthy spouse, your mom in this situation, would be able to keep $120,000 of those countable assets. Basically, everything is a countable asset except for a home, small cash value of life insurance, personal belongings, and a prepaid funeral, and an automobile. Everything else is a countable asset. So even if all those assets were in your mom's name, if you didn't do anything, they would have to be spent down. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. There are certain things that a certified elder law attorney, which I am, can do to try to protect those resources. So we're working right now with a family in a very similar situation, and we're going to be able to protect a majority, if not all, of the assets from that nursing home Medicaid spend down. And that's one of the things that if you are interested, again, I hate to keep pushing the workshop, but if you attend one of our clarity building workshops, we go over one of the 2 approaches of the long-term care question of how are you going to cover long-term care. And you can either plan ahead using things like asset-based long-term care insurance strategies, setting up things like a asset protection trust like a Castle Trust, or if you do have a loved one in a nursing home, there's still crisis planning strategies available. So if you do have a loved one in a nursing home paying $8,000 to $12,000 a month, there are certain things that we can do to try to protect those resources. Because unfortunately, the way the system's set up, unless you take proactive steps, what could happen is that all this money could be spent on your dad's care, and there might not be anything to make sure that your mom has best quality of life possible. So that's really what we're trying to do, is protect quality of life. So give us a call at 810-355-2584 if you want more information on one of our clarity building workshops where we do a deep dive into how to protect against the long-term care, devastating costs of long-term care. Now, this next question, this is from Howard. If I take the lump sum option for my company pension plan now that I'm no longer with the company and of retirement age, can I move those funds into another type of retirement vehicle without tax penalties? And this is from Howard. If I take the lump sum option for my company, what should I be doing with that money? So what you can do, so I'm going to assume you have something like a 401k or maybe a 403b at your company, but this is your pension. So they offered you to buy out your pension. And so basically what you can do is you can take that election, instead of taking the pension, do the lump sum buyout. And then most likely what you would do is you would put that into an IRA. And then once it's in an IRA, you're free to decide what you want to do with it, how you want to invest it, whether you want to convert any of it to a Roth. Maybe you want to pay the income tax on some of it now rather than later. But to answer your question, Howard, yes, you can then invest it. And basically, inside of an IRA, you can invest in almost any type of asset class. So if you want to look at mutual funds, annuities, stocks, bonds, etc., all of that can be invested inside of an IRA. IRA, it's kind of like a wrapper. So basically what you're doing is you're taking this income source from your company. They've offered you a lump sum buyout. And then once you do that lump sum buyout, then it gets deposited, or you can open up an IRA. And then once it's inside that IRA, you can decide how it's invested. So, and you can do that without any tax penalties. Now, the only you're not going to have a penalty, but if you do take the money outside of the IRA, assuming you're over 59 and a half, you would have to pay income tax on that. So hopefully that was helpful, Howard. Then the next one is from Jessica. So my husband passed away before his mother. He was named in the will. And Jessica asks, will my children be able to claim his share? My mother-in-law is dying. My husband died. As he is dead, can my sons receive his share as they are his legal sons? Well, on its face, this would seem like an easy question of typically, yeah, it's going to flow down the bloodline, but we have to take a step back and figure out how these assets were titled. So were they joint? If they're joints, then if they're joint, well, with mother, we're going to assume that father's passed away at this point. So it's just mother and husband. It's going to depend on what mom's trust says or what her will says or how the beneficiary designations are set up for mom. So assuming that there was, let's say, a trust and your husband, Jessica, passed away, and now your mother-in-law is going to pass away, most likely, if the trust is kind of drawn up the way that we typically see these, is that your husband's share would flow down the bloodline to go to the children. So that's going to be assuming that there was a trust, and we're relying on language called per stirpes, which means it flows down the bloodline. So if husband passes, when mother-in-law passes, his share doesn't go to you, but it goes down to the sons, mother-in-law's grandchildren. It's most likely how it would be handled. Now, if there is beneficiary designations, that's going to go to whoever was named as a beneficiary. If your husband was named as a beneficiary, kind of depends if anyone else was named as a beneficiary, because then it could be per capita or it could be per stirpes, meaning it could go to the other named beneficiaries. So if there was like 3 children and your husband was one of those children who are predeceased, his share might actually go to the other siblings. It really depends on how things were titled. Or maybe there was no beneficiary designation. Now we're relying on the laws of intestacy, and that means that things end up going into probate without a will. Well, the laws of intestacy say that your sons would receive their share. So to get to the bottom of this question, you have to figure out what assets are there and how are they titled and who are the beneficiaries, and then if there's a trust or not. So on its face, yes, Jessica, your children should receive your deceased husband's share, but I can't say for sure unless we know how things are titled. So hopefully that was helpful. Best of luck to your family in this situation. Now, the next question is from Terry. And with Terry asks, with the down market, is now a good time for Roth conversions? Well, I have to kind of give you that it depends answer. It depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. But now there is an opportunity for these because assuming you think the market's going to come back up, we just had this correction. So now what you could look at doing is pay the income tax now on less assets, get it out of that partnership with the U.S. government. Then you could look at things like putting it into a Roth, or you could look at putting it into a Castle trust, an asset protection trust. For example, I was working with a client who's using this market correction to move money out of her IRA, pay the income tax now, to put it into the asset protection trust so that the money inside of the trust could be protected against that devastating cost of long-term care. And then once the money's in the trust, it can be invested however you want it to be invested. But this is an opportunity right now with the market correction to look at doing things like maybe a Roth conversion or moving money into that asset protection trust. Because it is an opportunity. So hopefully that was helpful for you, Terry. Now, our next question, going rapid fire this week, is from Philip. So, who pays for my debt when I pass on? My wife is deceased. I have 4 sons who will share my estate. Well, Philip, it depends on what type of debt it is, because there's really 2 types of debt. There's what's called secured debt and unsecured debt. For example, unsecured debt would be something like secured debt would be something like a mortgage. Basically, you have a mortgage and it's secured by your real estate, your house, for example. So let's say you pass away. What happens is it triggers a due on sale clause, which means that now the mortgage company is going to basically say they need to be paid off. And so how would they be paid off? Well, if the 4 sons wanted to keep the house, they could use inheritance money to pay off the mortgage. They could maybe refinance it in one of their names, or they could sell the house and then pay off the mortgage and keep whatever the equity was. So that's an example of secured debt. Now, there's also what's called unsecured debt. And what unsecured debt is debt that's not secured by any type of asset. Things like this would be like credit cards. So things with credit cards, as long as it's just in your name, that debt, when you pass away, that debt also basically goes away as well. Now, they could file a claim in probate courts, but that would be up to the credit card company to do such a thing. But basically what happens is when you pass away, your unsecured debt passes away as well. Because what's the harm if they ding your credit score? I think when you pass away, you're not going to be looking to get any more loans. So that really shouldn't be an issue. So, of course, secured debt does stick with the asset after you pass away. Unsecured debt kind of goes by the wayside, though they could make a claim against your probate estate if they wanted to. Now, next question is from Clark. And Clark asks, can I make a large purchase with money in an irrevocable trust? I would like to start a business. Well, Clark, to answer your question, it really depends on what the trust says. There's lots of different types of irrevocable trusts, and so that you'd have to start with what does the document allow you to do. So, fortunately, I can't help you more on that one. You'd have to go back to the document. So, hopefully that was helpful. Join us next upcoming weeks of the Chris Berry Show. We're going to have some exciting guests joining us. We're going to have Kathleen Yannick from the Area Agency on Aging 1B. She's going to talk about just all the services the Area Agency on Aging offers, including things like Meals on Wheels, the Michigan Choice Waiver Program, things like that. And then also we're looking at getting someone from Angela Hospice on to talk to us about hospice and what hospice is. So we're excited to have these upcoming guests. Make it a great week. Even more than that, I hope you make it a great New Year's and see you in 2019.
Learn more about Chris Berry and how he can help your family by visiting online at thechrisberryshow.com. That's thechrisberryshow.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 810-355-2584. That's 810-355-2584. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the elder care firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the CJ Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice, or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security, or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.